Welcome back to another episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci. I'm excited to launch another episode for you all. I'm Vincent Lanci, speaker, coach, and author of the book Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption. When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while walking home from a friend's birthday. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized that it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal in my life. This transformative experience has led me to create a podcast that is all things mental health. Would it benefit you to hear from mental health professionals and influencers? Would it also add value to your life to hear mental health advocates share their authentic stories and hear them talk about their mental health, the disparities they face, and how they actively combat them? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you came to the right place. I want to start by congratulating you for making your mental health a priority. If you missed the last episode, be sure to download it after you tune in today. On this episode, I am happy to introduce my guest, David Demmer. David is a connection that I made over on Instagram. He is a clinical psychologist, but that's not all. He is also the co-founder of Macquarie Street Psychology and the co-founder of Psych School. He has his hands in a lot, but has a passion large enough to fill that commitment and service. Allow me to please introduce David Demmer. Dave, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, mate.
Absolutely. Would you mind please introducing yourself to our listeners and sharing part of your story before we dive in and get going? And also, please do share your role relating to mental health.
Sure, mate. Happy to. So I'm a doctor of clinical psychology down here in Melbourne, Australia. So most of my training was through the hospital system in psychology. I have a private psychology practice here locally where we have a couple of psychologists on board. So we mostly treat things like depression and anxiety. I'm also the founder of a online and face-to-face mental health wellbeing movement called Psych School, where we aim to bring psychological concepts and strategies to the general public. So trying to take mental health and mental wellness out of just the psychology clinic or out of the hospital and bringing it into the community. So that's me.
That's amazing. I'm really looking forward to diving in and learning all about that, and I'm sure our listeners will be too. But David, something I do on each episode is I share the mental health story of someone who is famous because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they are healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. Almost anyone who listens to music knows his name, but not many know the story relating to mental health. So allow me to please introduce the story relating to Kid Cudi. Kid Cudi has been open about his struggles with depression and mental health overall throughout his career. I admire this because it has inspired fans to seek help to better themselves. I wanted to include a few quotes from Cudi from this article, one being, quote, "For a long time, I was not happy when I woke up in the morning. Just being like, why don't I feel okay? I thought maybe it was stress. At that point, I was doing an album every year, so I thought maybe I was overdoing it and I needed to take a break. It took me a minute to realize there was something going wrong with me." In a separate article, I learned that Kid Cudi said fame and expectations from fans and the music industry figures led to a decline in his mental health. Cudi also talked about some past issues with drugs. He said that he used to take cocaine by himself and added that he hid the habit from friends because, quote, "it was a very private thing. I was dealing with my shit alone. I never did drugs around a bunch of people." David, what do you take away from this story relating to mental health?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, the thing I take away from it is the reason that you do it, which mental health can be anyone's battle. This doesn't necessarily, just happen to people who, might be down on their luck. This can really happen to anyone. There's kind of two main things I think about. I guess how I would talk about this in session with a client. If Kid Cudi was a client of mine, how would I support them?
Let's do it. Perfect.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I'd look at is that idea. One of those quotes there is around, "I just thought it was stress." And I think that's a really important point where a lot of people might put down what's going on for them in terms of a serious mental health battle as something like stress. So stress is really natural. Stress is really normal. And it becomes kind of overwhelming and moves into mental illness when it becomes something a little bit more significant. So really taking a moment when you're thinking that you're stressed to pay attention to, okay, is this stress? Is this transient? Is this something that's going to pass when, the overwhelming things that are on my plate pass? Or is this actually something more serious that I need to pay attention to? The second thing that I take away from that, I really like how Kikati talks here about the expectations of others and how that contributed to the impact. It's okay for us to have expectations. Expectations are natural and normal, and they're generally fine in life. But if they're not in line with our values or the person that we want to be or the life that we want to live, then they're definitely not going to be as fulfilling or meaningful as expectations that are guided by our values. I regularly talk to my clients about this idea of, fast forward to, the 85 or 90-year-old version of you, coming to the end of their life and reflecting on the life that they've lived. Are you living the life that you'll be proud of when you're 85 or 90? And that really comes back to your values and the expectations that you have around your own life, and the person you want to be in the life that you want to live.
I think that's remarkable advice, and I can't wait to get into the main event right now. You're going to have such great answers, I could tell. But Dave, what I do on each episode is I go over this series of 6 questions, which only slightly varies depending on if the guest is speaking on their own or others' mental health. By doing this, it allows me to deliver as much value to the listeners. You ready to go, man?
I am. Fire away, mate.
Great. So you touched it in the beginning of you may have worked with depression and anxiety in your practice, but many would agree that the more common or at least talked about types of mental illnesses are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia disorders. What areas do you come across the most?
So I guess in private practice, the way that the mental health system here in Australia is structured, that in the private practice system, we're generally dealing with what we refer to as high prevalence disorders. So high prevalence disorders are things like mood disorders, anxiety disorders. And the more lower prevalence disorders are more often treated, perhaps even in kind of the public hospital system, or even in the private hospital system, but they're more like schizophrenia, personality disorders, those types of things. So in private practice, I'm seeing, lots of depression, lots of anxiety stuff, so those high prevalence disorders. Also, obviously a fair bit of trauma work can come along with that. So be that childhood trauma, be that more kind of situational trauma that's had in adulthood, like what you were talking about in your introduction around TBI. I worked in TBI for about 5 or 6 years earlier in my career. I get one of the interesting things actually that I think as psychologists we're maybe not, at least in Australia, maybe not trained in as much as I thought, as much as it comes up for me in my work, right, is issues around kind of the self and self-worth. I find that I would say, between 50 to 75% of my clients at some point, I'm talking about these ideas of self-worth and inner critic voices and, how to be gentle and kind on ourselves. So self-worth is absolutely something that isn't necessarily a diagnosable, mental health illness, but is absolutely an issue that is so often comorbid with things like depression and anxiety. And lots of relational issues I see as well, relationship breakdowns. I also do a lot of couples therapy and relationship counseling in my work. So, but I think it's probably near impossible to find a client who comes in who doesn't have some sort of disrupted relationship in some area of their life that comes up in session.
I could definitely see that being true. And also going back to, although it may not be a diagnosis, I have some friends, I think, as well, who would fit that category if it were a diagnosis. But I would like to go back a second to the trauma experience you have. Obviously, I had a pretty traumatic incident that realigned some thoughts and perspectives on life, what's important and what's not. Yeah. So I'd love to hear some stories you have related to your experiences in trauma and maybe some advice for other people listening on who have been through a traumatic experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So the majority of my trauma work has been in physical trauma. So specifically around acquired brain injury. I was really lucky to be given up an opportunity to work in what's called an assisted living transitional program. So basically, after an individual, as you would know, after an individual, has some sort of significant trauma to their brain, then they're typically going into hospital. They go through, a pretty serious recuperation and recovery program,
Hmm.
and then there's this idea of, well, where do we go after that? What do we do after that? When someone doesn't necessarily need to be in the hospital system anymore, but maybe, depending on the significance of their injury, might not be able to go back to independent living straight away. So the place that I worked was what was called a transitional living centre, and it was a place where people would come after a traumatic brain injury, after they'd gone through their hospital stay, and they'd come and stay at this place full time. They'd live there for anywhere from kind of 3 to 6 months, as we supported them to reintegrate back into independent living and back into the community. And that was absolutely absolutely eye-opening and a really great way to start my career. And I think I guess one of the important things psychologically that I learned from that experience was the absolute impact on someone's mental health that the physical trauma can actually have. And I think sometimes our physical health, and I don't know whether it's rightly so or wrongly so. I don't necessarily have an opinion on that. But mental health absolutely tends to come second behind physical health in these types of instances. And in that, I think we can sometimes lose sight of the importance of mental health. Yeah. So even though, yes, we absolutely need to tend to the physical wellness of people, particularly after a traumatic brain injury, but let's not actually forget the impact that this is going to have on mental health. And Vincent, it sounds like this is actually something that's kind of at the forefront of your mind and what you do through your experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. It comes up once in a while on this show where you have a broken hand, you take 3 months off. You have a bad knee, you take a few weeks off. You don't take a month off to just get your mental health in line, which could be for the rest of your life if you took that little short window, developed a few good habits, and carried on. Some things that work for me are just constant exercise every day. That's great for me because I
Mm-hmm.
find the physical exercise does just as much, if not more, for my brain than my muscles and cardio and all that. I mean, my brain is much more clear and free thinking, if you can relate, after I have a good workout.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But you seem to be so passionate, obviously, about mental health. When did you first decide that taking a stance on mental health or a career related to mental health was going to be the right option for you?
hmm Look, I've always been super interested in human behavior. I've just always loved trying to be insightful into what motivates people to think in certain ways, what leads them to feel or behave or act in certain ways. Uh, I've just been kind of an observer of people and their behavior all of my life, and so psychology really made sense as a way forward for me as a career. I had a really inspirational psychology high school teacher as well, who really got me passionate about it. And then when I went on to uni and started studying it, I was certainly carrying a level of passion. But then
Right.
as I started to learn more about it at uni and know that it was more than just conversation, that the abundance of psychological research and the theory that comes into everything that we do in mental health, it's more than just emotions. It's perception, it's memory, it's neuroscience, it's cognition, there was so much more. And as I learned more and more at uni, my passion just grew and grew and grew and exploded. And I guess that kind of brought me to where I am today.
Yeah. Well, what was your first job, maybe internship? We could start after
Mhm.
university.
After university, so I worked in a private hospital here in Melbourne. So I worked across the inpatient and outpatient wards.
Okay.
So in the outpatient wards, we had what we call outpatient programs. So people out in the community would come in 1 day a week for 8 or 12 weeks and do a group program that might focus on cognitive behavioural therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioural therapy, and then the inpatient wards was obviously a place where people who were really struggling with mental health issues were able to come in and get the supportive treatment for kind of as long as they needed. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to see where your future even progresses with all the happenings you have right now, especially psych school. But what advice
Me
can you
too.
give to our listeners as what may be considered a potential early sign that they need to start paying more attention to their mental health? What do you got for us? Maybe
Mm.
developing a mental illness. What can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that really stuck in my mind from my early training that a lecturer said to us one day was look for the biologicals first, which
Okay.
basically means, is there changes to your sleep? Is there changes to your energy? Is there changes to your eating patterns? So if you're not particularly sleep and energy, because we have a little less kind of conscious control over those than we do our eating patterns.
Hmm.
Uh, but if you're noticing that you're sleeping less or you're sleeping more, what might that mean? Is it that kind of transient experience of stress, like I was talking about before, or might it actually be something more significant? So typically with mental illness, we often find that the biologicals are impacted first.
Hmm.
It's pretty rare to find a mental illness, so something like, particularly the high prevalence ones like anxiety and depression,
Hmm.
where sleep is not impacted. So if your regular sleep cycle is out of whack, then just think about what might be going on there. As I was saying, energy, so things around motivation,
Hmm.
zest, drive, you get up and go, your lust for life. That's often one of the early things to disappear as well, particularly in a depressive episode. So if you're noticing those things that you used to enjoy doing aren't bringing you that same level of pleasure anymore, pay attention to what that might mean. Also, if you're noticing perhaps some coping strategies that might be particularly unhelpful are starting to develop. So, alcohol, people drink alcohol. If you're noticing that your intake is perhaps increasing, if you're noticing that maybe you're having a drink earlier in the day, or if you're noticing that perhaps you're relying on it as an emotional regulation strategy, then for me, that's a bit of a red card. Social withdrawal, really important to consider as well. I know it's a bit
That's
of a
a good
strange
one.
time at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange time at the moment with lockdown and isolation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So a little bit of social withdrawal is actually kind of forced upon us at the moment. But I guess outside of these times, just consider, am I not seeing friends as much, and kind of am I consciously doing that? Another tip something that I generally always start in therapy from session one is tracking my client's mood and having them just each day reflect on, out of 10, what their average mood was. So, 0 being, really, really bad, 10 being, fantastic, best I've ever felt. And then obviously through treatment, we try to track that, and we obviously hope for an increase. But that's not something that has to happen in therapy. I say to people all the time, hey, why don't you just start tracking your mood? Why don't you just spend, the next month tracking it and see where it goes? It takes 5 seconds each day to jot down on a piece of
Yes.
paper or record it in your phone. And you're collecting data. And that's really, really important. And over time, you're going to say, okay, how does my mood fluctuate? How does it go? And you've also got a bit of a benchmark to refer back to.
Hmm.
And of course, if you're noticing early warning signs, get support, reach out, ask for some help. You don't have to wait until stuff is really bad in order to get support.
I think that's a great way to put it. And now we're about to dive into some short-term solutions people can start to take. But I do want to touch on, for everybody listening on, how is the lockdown in Australia? You mentioned it's a different time, and I can agree with you there. So it's tough to gauge that. But are you on complete lockdown, 24 hours a day? What's it like in Australia?
No, look, we've been relatively lucky from my perspective, in my opinion anyway, in Australia in terms of, I guess, the impact of the virus itself from kind of a medical and health point of view. Of course, lockdown had just tragic consequences for the economy and a lot of people's livelihoods.
Yeah.
And it was certainly necessary to protect people's health and well-being. We, at the moment, we are allowed to. We need to work from home if we can work from home. I'm lucky enough that I'm a healthcare worker, so I'm able to still go into our clinic, and it's a healthy and safe place to be. But restaurants have reopened. but they're only allowed about, I think maybe 20 people inside at any given time. We're allowed out in groups of 10 people, like to go,
Oh,
to a
so it's
park
still
or have a
early.
picnic
It's
or
still
something like
early
that.
phases. Yeah.
It is, yeah, but we weren't allowed out only a month ago. We weren't allowed out with more than one other person, and it was really only for exercise, to go to the
Yep.
supermarket,
Same here. Yep.
or to or from work. How's it over there? What exactly is there now?
I'm in Tampa, Florida. Florida was one of the earlier stages to open up.
Mhm.
It's either very old population here and very young for the most part,
Yep.
so it's kind of difficult. But certain parts in the Miami area, they got hit a lot harder than over here in Tampa. But to get back on track here, I want to hear three, and I say only three because I want the three most important things our listeners can do on a short-term or daily basis to improve their mental health. What do you got for us?
All right. So as I said before, one of the things that was taught to me early in my training was manage the biologicals first. So your physical health is so important for your mental health. I can't stress that enough. So that body-mind connection. So looking after your health and well-being through things like sleep, things like exercise, a balanced diet, looking after even your personal hygiene has an impact on your mental health. So make sure you're looking after your physical body in order to help your mental well-being. The second thing I want to talk about is developing a practice of gratitude. So this comes from positive psychology. Gratitude is the process of deliberately and consciously giving thanks and being grateful for the positives in your life. That might be people, it might be moments in the day, it might be a cup of tea in the morning, it might be a friend who's come over and helped you out on something. But deliberately reflecting on things that you're grateful for will begin to shift your perspective towards looking for the positives in your life. Super important. Yeah. The last one kind of relates to that idea of self-worth that I was talking about before. And if probably in my work, if I could teach people only one thing, it would be self-compassion. So being gentle on yourself, being kind to yourself, when those inner critical voices come up, and we all have them, we're all very familiar with them. When we make a mistake, when we experience a failure in life, do I beat myself for that? Or do I be compassionate around the pain that I'm experiencing because of that mistake?
Nice.
Being compassionate towards yourself is so super important to stabilize and protect your mood. Think about how we tend to respond to friends who are in pain. We don't beat them. We don't punish them.
Right.
We don't treat them poorly. We're compassionate towards them. We care for them. We support them. Let's do that to ourselves as well. Super important.
I love that. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So short-term initiatives, you gave us three great ones right here. I'm really excited to see what you got for us for long-term initiatives here, because this is something where now people are on track, they're getting going, and we need to help them sustain it. What are two longer-term commitments that our listeners can make to create a healthier mindset?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I want to talk to people about the idea of values. So values are those guiding principles in your life that are important to you. So we have values in different domains of our life. So, we might have values in our relationship. So what sort of partner do I want to be? Have values in our friendship. What sort of friend do I want to be? And what sort of friendships do I value? Mm-hmm. Around parenting, about being a worker, about being a member of the community, those types of things. Living by your values, I guess psychologically, we could say is, really the thing that is going to carry you through the rest of your life. It is the thing that is going to allow you, as I said before, to get to 85 or 95 years old and to reflect back on your life and to say, you know what, that was the life I wanted to live and I'm proud of it. And sometimes living by our values is not easy. Sometimes living by our values causes us distress. It causes us anxiety. It's scary. The example I give to clients is, I've got a strong values in my domain of friendship, and it's important that, if friends ask something of me, then to best of my ability, I will do that for them. So, imagine if a friend asked you to speak at, do a speech at their wedding, in front of 500 people. And the value of friendship for you is really saying to you, oh yeah, I want to do that. That's really important to me because, my friends asked me to do that. But maybe you have a huge fear around public speaking. And so in order to actually do that, you need to carry the anxiety that you feel around doing that speech in order to meet that value of friendship. So as I said, it's not always easy, but to get to the end of your life and to reflect back and say, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what I did and how I live my life. Focus on your values. And also within that, I guess the second point is finding purpose and meaning in your life. So having kind of an overall idea of what your life is about and the things that you stand for. I don't necessarily like to give people suggestions around purpose and meaning because it's so individualized. But to be able to figure out kind of why am I here and what can I do is incredibly powerful and will also kind of carry you through the rest of your life.
I really like the way you put that. That's sound advice. But we touched on it a little bit about what you have going on, psych school, a few other things. I want to take this time to now talk about some ways that you plan on raising awareness for the importance of mental health in the future. You have a few things going on. Let's hear about it.
Yeah, look, so psych school is certainly first and foremost, it's my baby, and kind of this is how I really want to bring mental health into the community. So my goal is to be able to help people develop strong and powerful psychological strategies, but before they get to me. My ultimate goal, my ultimate idea in my career is to put myself out of a job as a psychologist. Yeah, I'm not someone, it would be great if I wasn't needed. So if we can get that stuff out into the community before they actually have to get into our clinics, that's fantastic. And so that's what Psych School is all about, to be able to kind of bring good psychological functioning out into the community as more of a prevention rather than a curative approach.
I love it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it grows, and we'll have to check in with you down the road. But Dave, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know our listeners are going to see all the value in it today. I loved how you kind of gave everybody who maybe wants a career in psychology your timeline of exactly how you went. And you started with high prevalence disorders, which are very common for people listening to the show, with anxiety and things like that. I also like how you gave the simple advice of 5 seconds a day, write down your mood, track your mood. That's something quick, easy. Everybody listening can do it without much hesitation. But it is time for the last word here, Dave. And I do this on my other podcast. I have What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur, because I want our listeners to really get to know my guests. Is there something that you would like to share with everybody listening on that we did not get to touch on yet today?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So it's probably a bit of an amalgamation of some of the things we have spoken about, but one of the key messages I really feel it's important to get out there for people is the idea of mental illness versus mental wellness, just like physical illness versus physical wellness. Right? So if we think about physical illness, if we have something like tonsillitis or bronchitis or a chest infection or something like that, we go to the doctors, we get some penicillin or some antibiotics, and we go home, we take the tablets, and we get better and we stop taking the tablets. That's what illness is about. Yeah? But then physical wellness are things that we do ongoingly in our lives to protect against physical illness. So, getting exercise, drinking enough water, eating a healthy diet, all those types of things. I think maybe where we're not at quite yet, as a community or as a population or as a world, is focusing more on mental wellness rather than mental illness. So the things, what are the things that you can do ongoingly every day as part of your life and as part of your routine to protect your mental wellness so you don't become mentally ill? Yeah. That's what's super important. So, it's everything from exercise to gratitude to self-compassion to, there's a million and one strategies, but I really want people out there to stop and to think, okay, I need to consider my mental health, not just when I'm struggling, but also when I'm doing well in order to prevent myself from struggling again.
I love it, Dave. Would you please share your social media, website, ways for our listeners to follow these endeavors, get involved, reach out to you?
Mhm. Sure. Look, yeah, my Instagram handle's dave.demmer, Demm for Michael, ER. And then Psych School is psych, psych.school. Facebook, psych.school. Our website, www.psych.school. And my LinkedIn, my personal LinkedIn is Dr. David Demmer.
Dave, thanks so much again. And everyone listening on, be sure to check out his social media, website, and content. And it is social media time for the shows, and we're on whichever platform you like to use. We're at a Mental Health Break on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and on Twitter at Podcasts by Lanci, so you get updates from this show and what it's really like to be an entrepreneur. Of course, my handles are at Vincent A. Lanci on all social media and YouTube, and my website is vincentalanci.com. If you check out my books, DM me. I want to hear from you. We have Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, and How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm Has Changed, both on Amazon now. Let me know what you think. If you enjoyed today's episode, please continue listening and rate A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci 5 stars. I work hard to find value delivering guests for you on each episode. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci.